I've never said this aloud before. Maybe that's why it still echoes inside me like a curse I can't escape. I cheated on my husband. There, it's written now. Plain, irreversible, and ugly. People say confessions set you free, but I've learned that sometimes, they only remind you of the chains you forged yourself. We had what most would call an ordinary marriage, the kind that looks fine from the outside but is quietly starving from the inside. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone smiled, watered their lawns, and pretended not to hear the arguments through thin walls. My husband, Daniel, worked as a sales manager at an appliance store, the kind of man who believed love was best shown through stability, through bills paid on time, the car serviced, the garden trimmed. He loved in silence. I needed words. I needed warmth. I used to wait for him to come home, to ask how his day went, to touch me like I still mattered. But somewhere between his long hours and my silent resentment, we stopped meeting in the same space. He became a man who sat beside me, not with me. The house was full, but I was lonely. The man I cheated with wasn't extraordinary either. That's the worst part. It wasn't some grand, cinematic affair with candlelight and whispers. It was raw, messy, and real, born from loneliness and the need to be seen. His name doesn't matter. What matters is that, for a few stolen weeks, I felt wanted again. I felt alive. When it ended, the guilt came like a flood, thick, choking, relentless. I swore to myself that Daniel would never find out. He didn't. Not then, not ever. We carried on like nothing happened. He still mowed the lawn on Saturdays, I still cooked his favorite stew on Sundays. But I stopped seeing him as the man I married. I started seeing him as the man I betrayed. The turning point came 3 years later. Daniel began to withdraw completely. He wasn't angry, just distant. He started leaving early, coming home late. He said he was working more shifts. I wanted to believe him, but the paranoia that once protected my secret turned on me. What if he was doing what I did? What if karma was coming full circle? That's when I made the worst decision of my life. I hired a private investigator, a quiet, gray-haired man named Mr. Royce, who looked like someone's kindly uncle but had eyes that never blinked too long. I told him I just wanted to know if my husband was okay. He smiled, like he'd heard that line 100 times before, and asked no questions. For 2 weeks, he followed Daniel. He sent me brief updates, where he went, who he met, what he did. It was all painfully ordinary, office, lunch alone, home. Until the 3rd week. That's when Mr. Royce's tone changed. He called one afternoon and said, "There's something you should know. But I need to tell you in person." My heart sank. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I remember driving to the cafe he chose, a small, dim place near the edge of town. The entire drive there, my mind rehearsed every possibility. Maybe Daniel was seeing someone, maybe he'd found out about me, maybe he was planning to leave. But what Mr. Royce told me wasn't any of those things. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photos, Daniel sitting on a park bench, feeding birds, looking older than I remembered. In every picture, he looked empty. Not angry, not joyful, just hollow. He's not seeing anyone, the spy said quietly. He spends most of his evenings there. Alone. Sometimes he just sits for hours, staring at nothing. I've seen men like that before. He's grieving something he never told anyone about. Something inside me cracked that moment. I whispered, "Grieving what?" Royce sighed. "You." That word hit harder than any accusation could. I wanted to argue, to deny, to say I was still there, still cooking, still sleeping beside him. But I wasn't. Not really. Not since the night I crossed a line I could never uncross. The spy didn't know what I'd done, but somehow, he saw it in Daniel's silence. He saw the emptiness I'd created. When I left that cafe, I didn't go home right away. I parked a few blocks away from our house and watched the light in our bedroom window. Daniel was sitting there, alone, the blue glow of the television flickering on his face. He looked so small, so breakable. And for the first time, I realized that I hadn't just cheated on my husband. I'd killed something sacred between us, something that could never be replaced. That night, I cried without sound. Because the man I betrayed was still there. But the version of me he once loved had died long before he ever knew. I used to believe silence was peace. That if Daniel and I stopped fighting, if we could just live side by side without arguments, that meant things were getting better. I didn't realize that silence can be a wound too, one that never stops bleeding. After Mr. Royce, the private investigator, handed me those photographs, something in me began to unravel. For days, I couldn't look Daniel in the eyes. Every time I saw him sitting at the dining table, reading the newspaper or sipping his tea, my chest would tighten. He looked like a ghost of the man I'd fallen in love with, not because he was gone, but because I had made him disappear. He didn't know what I had done, but somehow, his body carried the truth. The way he spoke softly but distantly, the way he avoided long conversations, it was as if he was living in a house haunted by memories he couldn't explain. And I was the ghost he couldn't see but could still feel. I tried to make up for it. I cooked more often, I laughed at his dry jokes, the ones that used to annoy me. I even bought a new dress, the kind he used to say looked beautiful on me, but nothing reached him. His smile was polite, his kisses were routine. We were two people acting like a married couple who had forgotten their lines. One night, I asked him, "Are you happy, Daniel?" He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "I don't know anymore." Those words burned. I wanted to tell him everything, to confess, to release this secret that was slowly poisoning me, but fear held my tongue. I told myself I was protecting him, protecting us. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was protecting myself from seeing the disappointment in his eyes. Weeks passed, and the distance grew. We still shared the same bed, but there was a coldness between us, a quiet separation that no warmth could bridge. He would turn his back to me at night, and I would lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering how a woman could feel so lonely with the man who once promised her forever. One rainy afternoon, I saw him sitting in his car outside the house, just sitting there, engine off, staring at the steering wheel. He stayed like that for nearly 20 minutes before coming in. I didn't ask where he'd been. I was too afraid of the answer. That night, I looked through the photographs Mr. Royce had given me again. Each one felt like a mirror reflecting my guilt. There was Daniel on the park bench, feeding the birds. There he was walking down a quiet street, holding a paper bag, looking like a man searching for something that no longer existed. And then, there was one photo that destroyed me completely. It was Daniel standing outside a small cafe, the same one where I had met Mr. Royce. His hands were in his pockets, his face turned slightly toward the door, as if he had been there before. Maybe he had. Maybe he went there because it reminded him of something, or someone. I wanted to ask him about it, but I couldn't. Instead, I did something pathetic. I followed him the next day. I told myself it wasn't spying, that I just wanted to understand. But really, it was guilt disguised as curiosity. When they left, Daniel sat there a little longer, staring after them. Then he took something from his pocket, a small ring box. He opened it, stared inside for a moment, and then closed it again. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that box. It was the same one he had used when he proposed to me. He still carried it. I broke down right there in the car, tears flooding my face, blurring everything. Because that tiny act told me everything I needed to know, Daniel hadn't stopped loving me. He was holding on to the memory of us, even after I had let go. That night, I tried to reach for him in bed, my hand trembling as I touched his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. The silence between us spoke louder than any fight ever could. And lying there beside the man who still carried our broken love in his pocket, I realized the cruelest punishment of all wasn't being caught. It was knowing that I had destroyed someone who still loved me completely. There are moments in a marriage that define everything that follows, moments that divide life into before and after. For me, that moment came on a night so ordinary it should have meant nothing. But that's the thing about guilt, it turns the smallest moments into mirrors, forcing you to see everything you've tried to hide. It was late, a Wednesday, I think. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the living room clock. Daniel had been home for hours, sitting on the couch, staring at the television without watching it. I had spent most of the evening pretending to read, but my eyes kept drifting toward him. There was a distance in the room that felt almost physical, like an invisible wall between us. He was there, but unreachable. And I, the architect of that wall, couldn't find a way to climb it. When he finally stood up and turned off the TV, I asked softly, "You're going to bed already?" He nodded. "Early shift tomorrow." His voice was calm but hollow. I followed him into the bedroom, watching as he moved through the quiet ritual of undressing, the folding of his shirt, the placement of his watch on the nightstand, the way he rubbed his temples as if trying to erase the day. When he slid under the covers, I hesitated at the edge of the bed. I wanted to say something, anything, to pierce through the silence. I wanted to tell him about the spy, about the photos, about how I knew what he did on those long, lonely afternoons. But how could I? The truth would ruin what little we had left. Instead, I lay beside him and whispered, "Daniel, do you ever miss us?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear his breathing, slow, deliberate, like a man weighing every possible response. Then he said, "Every day." My heart clenched. Then why do we keep living like strangers? He turned then, not toward me, but just enough for the dim light from the window to fall across his face. His eyes met mine for the first time in what felt like forever. But there was something different in them, something distant. He was looking through me, not at me. "Because I don't know who you are anymore," he said quietly. The words hit harder than any accusation could have. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just stated it as a fact, calm, steady, final. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I wanted to tell him that I was still the same woman, that I still loved him, that I still remembered every small thing, the way he took his coffee, the stories he told about his childhood, the sound of his laughter when he was truly happy. But the truth was, I wasn't that woman anymore. The night I betrayed him, I killed her. He turned away and closed his eyes, but I could tell he wasn't asleep. The rise and fall of his chest was too uneven. He was awake, lost somewhere between holding on and letting go. I lay there, tears slipping silently down my face, remembering the early days of our marriage. How he used to pull me close in the mornings. How we used to talk about everything, even our fears. And how slowly, almost without realizing it, we stopped being each other's safe place. At some point, the guilt became too much. I whispered, "Daniel, I'm sorry." He didn't move, didn't respond, but I saw his hand tighten slightly on the blanket. Maybe he heard me, maybe he didn't, but that one whispered apology carried the weight of every secret, every lie, every stolen moment I wished I could undo. The next morning, he was gone before I woke. The house felt colder than usual, the air heavier. On the kitchen table, there was a note in his handwriting. Greater than, "Don't wait up tonight. Late meeting. Take care of yourself. No love you, no see you later, just polite detachment." I held that note for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. The thought crossed my mind, what if he knew? What if he had known all along, but had chosen silence over confrontation? It would explain the distance, the quiet resignation, the way he looked at me as though I were already gone. Maybe he didn't need proof. Maybe his heart had felt the truth long before any evidence could have confirmed it. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights off, waiting for him to come home. I watched the headlights of passing cars through the curtains, hoping one of them would slow down in front of our house. But he didn't come home. For the first time, I understood how loneliness can feel like punishment, not from someone else, but from yourself. I had built this emptiness. I had chosen the lie over the love. When he finally returned the next morning, his eyes were red-rimmed, his shirt wrinkled. He didn't say where he had been, and I didn't ask. We both sat in silence, two strangers pretending to be married. That was the night I realized the cruelest part of betrayal isn't losing the other person. It's losing the version of yourself they used to believe in. And as I watched Daniel stir his coffee in silence, I knew we were living with a ghost, not one that haunted the house, but one that lived inside both of us. There's a strange heaviness that comes from living a lie for too long. It doesn't happen all at once, it seeps in slowly, like water through cracked stone, until everything inside you begins to rot. I told myself I could live with my secret. That if Daniel never found out, the guilt would fade. But I was wrong. The guilt didn't fade. It grew roots. Weeks passed after that night he looked through me. Nothing changed on the surface, the house was still tidy, dinners were still quiet, and we still exchanged the same meaningless pleasantries. But beneath that calm, there was something unspoken that grew larger each day. It wasn't anger or resentment anymore. It was resignation. I noticed Daniel had started keeping his phone closer. Not in a suspicious way, but in a guarded one. He had conversations I wasn't part of. He smiled less. He slept facing the wall, his back to me, every night. And I became an observer in my own marriage, watching the distance expand inch by inch. One Saturday morning, he told me he was driving to visit his mother in another town. Normally, I would have gone with him, but this time, I lied. I said I had a headache. He kissed my forehead gently, a soft, automatic gesture, and left. I sat by the window after he drove away, staring at the empty driveway, and something inside me cracked open. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that silence was atonement. So I did something I'd sworn I would never do again. I called Mr. Royce, the private investigator. I didn't even know what I wanted from him. Maybe I just needed someone who knew part of the truth. Someone I didn't have to lie to. When he answered, his voice was calm, measured. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, recognizing my voice instantly. "It's been a while. Do you ever stop seeing what you've seen?" I asked him. He paused. "No, but some people learn to forgive what they've done." I laughed bitterly. "Forgive? How do you forgive yourself for breaking someone who loved you?" There was silence on the other end. Then he said quietly, "By telling the truth, even if it's too late." That sentence stayed with me for days. By telling the truth. It sounded simple, but the thought of saying it aloud terrified me. I imagined Daniel's face, the confusion, the disbelief, the heartbreak. I imagined the silence that would follow, heavier than all the lies combined. But the truth was eating me alive. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote him a letter. I started with, "You once told me honesty is love's only language. I stopped speaking it the day I betrayed you." I poured everything onto that page, the loneliness, the weakness, the affair, the guilt. Every word felt like bleeding. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in an envelope. My plan was simple. I would leave it on his pillow and leave before he came home. I couldn't bear to see his face when he read it. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. He came home early. I froze, the envelope still in my hand. Daniel looked exhausted, his shirt clinging to his skin, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He dropped his keys on the counter and gave me a faint smile, the kind that no longer reached his eyes. "What's that?" he asked, noticing the envelope. I panicked. "Just some old bills," I lied, slipping it behind me. He nodded slowly, studying me the way a man studies something he's already figured out. Then, almost casually, he said, "I've been thinking, maybe we should take a break. Spend some time apart." It felt like the ground vanished beneath me. "A break?" I whispered. He nodded again, avoiding my eyes. "I think we've both been pretending everything's okay. But it's not. You're not the same. I'm not the same. Maybe some space will help." I wanted to scream no. I wanted to confess everything right there, to tell him that I deserved his anger, not his distance. But fear silenced me again. I said nothing. He went to bed early that night. I sat in the dark, clutching the letter in my hand, wondering if honesty was still worth anything when love was already gone. The next morning, he left before sunrise. His suitcase was gone. He didn't leave a note this time. I sat on the floor of our bedroom for hours, surrounded by the ghost of what used to be us. The letter, still sealed, lay in front of me. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it, but I couldn't deliver it either. That afternoon, I drove to the same park where Mr. Royce had taken the photographs. I sat on the same bench Daniel used to sit on. For the first time, I understood what he was doing there all those months. He wasn't escaping me. He was grieving me, the version of me that had loved him honestly. And sitting there in the quiet, with the letter still trembling in my hand, I realized something painful but true. Sometimes, confession doesn't heal anything. It just confirms the damage you've already done. It's strange how grief doesn't always come from death. Sometimes, it comes from the quiet realization that you've destroyed something that once gave your life meaning. That's what I felt the morning after Daniel left, a hollow ache that wasn't just about losing him, but about losing the version of myself I could never return to. The house felt larger without him. Every room echoed differently, as if it was reminding me how empty it had become. The bed felt cold, the walls seemed to breathe with the memory of our laughter, and the kitchen smelled faintly of his cologne from the last morning he stood there. I tried to fill the silence, turned on the TV, made coffee, opened the windows, but nothing drowned out the sound of my own guilt. Days turned into weeks. I didn't call him. He didn't call me. His absence became another habit, something I learned to live around. But the envelope, that cursed letter, stayed on the nightstand, unopened, unmailed, a silent reminder of everything I'd done wrong. Then one afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short, polite, almost cold. Greater than, "I'm moving my things next weekend. Please don't be here." No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew his tone too well. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers trembling above the screen. That was it. No confrontation, no closure, no shouting. Just quiet endings, the kind that leave you haunted because there's nothing left to fix. When the weekend came, I did as he asked. I packed a small bag and drove to a motel 2 towns away. I thought I'd feel relief, like escaping a crime scene, but all I felt was emptiness. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I sat on the motel bed, watching the ceiling fan turn in lazy circles, and realized I had become a spectator in my own story. By the time I returned home on Sunday evening, he was gone. His clothes, his books, his coffee mug, all missing. The house looked stripped of life. But on the kitchen counter, there was something waiting for me, a small wooden box, the one he used to keep his old letters and keepsakes. My heart thudded as I opened it. Inside was the ring box. The same one I had seen him holding in the park. The same one from our engagement. The diamond was gone, only the empty velvet slot remained. Beneath it was a folded note in his handwriting. Greater than, you once told me love could survive anything if it was real. I believed you, but I think some wounds run too deep to heal with silence. I forgive you, even if I never hear the reason. I just can't live in a house built on ghosts anymore. Take care of yourself. He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. I felt every word like a blade sliding through everything I'd ever hidden. He knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe not when or with whom. But he knew. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat there, reading the note over and over, until the ink began to blur. And then, for the first time in months, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the woman I'd been pretending to be. I saw someone smaller, someone quieter, someone human. The truth is, people talk about forgiveness like it's some kind of miracle cure. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just stops the bleeding long enough for you to live with the scar. Daniel had forgiven me in his way, not with words, but with his absence. And I had to learn to forgive myself in mine. In the weeks that followed, I started going back to the park. At first, it felt wrong, like trespassing on his grief. But over time, I began to understand why he went there. It wasn't to remember what he'd lost, it was to let it go. One afternoon, I sat on that same bench with the letter I had written him still sealed in my hand. I had carried it everywhere, too afraid to send it, too ashamed to destroy it. But as the wind rustled through the trees, I finally tore it open. I read it one last time, every confession, every regret, every, I'm sorry, and then I set it on fire. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges until it was nothing but ash. I watched it scatter into the wind, disappearing piece by piece. That was the day I finally saw myself, not as the wife who cheated, not as the woman he left, but as someone capable of owning her truth. Someone who could live with what she'd done, even if no one else ever knew. I still wear my wedding ring, not as a symbol of marriage, but as a reminder of the price of deceit. It reminds me that love isn't something you keep, it's something you earn every day, and once it's gone, it rarely comes back. Daniel never reached out again. I don't blame him. Sometimes, the kindest thing love can do is walk away. And though I'll always carry the weight of what I did, I've learned something about pain, it doesn't always destroy you. Sometimes, it just reveals the person you really are. This story is a fictionalized true confession meant for mature audiences. It contains themes of infidelity, guilt, and emotional conflict. All names and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. Thank you for staying with me through this emotional journey. Heartbreak. If this story touched you, moved you, or made you think twice about love, forgiveness, or trust, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps keep true emotional storytelling alive. Don't forget to turn on notifications bell so you never miss our next deep and soul-stirring episode in the True Infidelity Stories 2025 series. Loudspeaker, join the conversation below. What would you have done if you were in her place? Sometimes, the truth we hide from others is the one that frees us the most.